how would you say, do you have some thoughts on how I'm introducing this?
Um, Maybe just a catch up and to looking into why it is I'm moving
Hmm.
and where I've been in terms of my because I think people have had a at times, right, like we talked about work being stressful and what's happened maybe with regards to that.
Yeah. And are we going to go into like what happened at work, or your thoughts about that service industry?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Then here we go. Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. We are online at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. My name is Andy Libson, and today we're joined by Kenny Zepeda, and we're missing Jessica and Eduardo. Eduardo will be back, I think, next week. Jessica will be back next week. We believe Kenny will be here next week. But there's, like I said, there's gonna be a lot of changing characters, because I think in 2 weeks I'm not gonna be here. So today it's just me and Kenny. And when Kenny and I talked a little bit about what would be worth discussing, and in the background to some of our, or rather, there's been, I think there's an interesting story to talk about, Kenny, your work. And this is the work you've left in the service industry in San Francisco. You had a long experience at one place, and then you had a more recent experience in another place. But you had always said that there was a lot of stories to tell about that. And so today, I think it's about the service industry in San Francisco, the service industry in a sanctuary city, the service industry under capitalism, and what what it looks like in the inside. I think that's kind of, and then what where you're going now, and what are your hopes for yourself and for your partner, and we'll just do a little catch up here.
Sounds good.
So I really do think we should start with, what do you feel like is, well, what is it that most people might not know, about the kind of work you were doing, and maybe describe, maybe in detail, what you were doing, and then what is it people might not know about that, or go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in the restaurant industry in San Francisco for 17 years. It's a pretty big industry that sustains a lot of people. Um, and so I've done everything from bussing tables to being a server and then becoming a manager, um, and also being a manager through the pandemic, right? And all those changes that were happening, and also seeing firsthand how a lot of people were affected, right? A lot of coworkers, the layoffs, the scheming that a lot of businesses did to let go of some people and rehiring people at minimum wage. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like I don't know, it's a lot to cover in the sense of I've always thought that there's a lot of hypocrisy in terms of for example, when we talk about sanctuary city, because I think that is misleading. When you look into why and how the restaurant industry runs, and it's mainly because of undocumented work, undocumented labor that is exploited, and I think there is a lot of racism hidden under this cloud of being a progressive liberal city. But it's as exploitative as any other industry, I think. And I am able to see that, right, because like I speak both languages. I'm also an immigrant. I've never been an undocumented immigrant. Actually, if you count me not working with a COVID vaccine, maybe that's that was maybe some proximity to to that because it threatened my livelihood. I was afraid of being persecuted. So definitely, I think there's some comparisons to draw from there. But again, by and large, this industry in San Francisco operates because of undocumented labor, and everyone knows it. And I think there's different layers of how racism manifests itself in not just in the wages but in the positions and the expectations of certain workers over other workers. But I think that's where I would start. That what I was bringing up before, because I think there's a lot of abuse, labor abuse, that because of the nature of the work that is not really organized labor, there is no representation or way to push back as a collective. There's a lot of practices that are just horrible, and it forces to do people a lot of horrible things, like working 2 to 3 jobs, renting a bed only, um, and also a lot of dependencies arise from this lifestyle. Just being in the industry and working so much, and also you know just trying to make it in a city that's so brutal in terms of the cost of living. But I don't know if you have any particular questions.
Well, I wonder if it's worth first. I'm sure even before COVID, you had some thoughts about this industry and you had some criticisms of it. I do understand the notion. Like, I think it's the idea that San Francisco so gives itself credit for being a sanctuary city and inviting immigrants in, but as you're saying, it apparently invites immigrants in only to grind them up in the places like the service industry. So who's getting a favor done for them, kind of thing. And again, that's that liberal kind of affect of like, hey, we're doing this because we love immigrants. But no, apparently these policies of sanctuary city just create a cohort of easily exploitable labor. I guess the question I would ask, is it worth first talking about the industry prior to COVID, in terms of, and then maybe the changes that you saw as a result of COVID?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that that in San Francisco it's normal, for example, to hire people part time, right? Just about every restaurant job hires people part time. People get paid the minimum wage, and most of the money comes from tips, right? Um, and so generally, the servers we make, bartenders we make the most. The busters, runners, front of the house staff would make them, based on tips, right? Like they would distribute the tips. Servers make the most, and so there's this hierarchy, right? And it worked different in different restaurants, and I think there has been some shifts in regards to that and how people get paid. Because technically, your employers are not supposed to have a say on how tips get distributed, but increasingly they've been using the tips as a lure to compensate for kitchen staff who basically they were getting minimum wage and like working really hard jobs. Working in the kitchen it's intense. You're working with heat, you're working with a lot of stress, especially the higher up, the higher end restaurants. um, but again, like, so tips is an important part of why people do join the service industry, the restaurant industry. And so again, the kitchen usually wouldn't get any tips, but increasingly, people are. There was a shortage, I think, prior to COVID, of cooks. There was people were being more selective as to what jobs they would pick, and so they couldn't just hire, you know, a cook. And the other, I think, misconception is that you can just hire anybody. And that is not something that a lot of businesses can afford, to train someone from zero. They have to have some background. But even despite some leverage on the side of the cooks, for example, restaurants can pay more than like $20. Like now you're starting to see some places that pay more, but that's nothing for San Francisco, right? $20. And so they've compensated increasingly with
And you mean $20? You mean $20 an hour?
$20 an hour from
Yeah.
the establishment, and then now they're using tips as a extra income that they can use as a lure for more skilled cooks or kitchen staff. Whether it's a prep person, pastry cooks, saute, fry station. A lot of these jobs are hard that not a lot of locals or Americans, quote unquote American born people will do, because it's hard work and low pay. And again, but that whole tip situation has been shifting. Employers have more of a say on how that gets distributed, even though it doesn't come as a payment from the establishment. And that's also changed a little bit through COVID. But I think that that's something that was that happened previous to COVID, and increasingly to places were trying to give health insurance to people. So there is like things like a city mandate where there's a percentage charge to the consumers. Like at one place it was 3.5, at another place was 7%. It ranges between 3 and 7%. And that's one way that a city mandate forces a fee for consumers so they can afford health insurance for their employees. But of course, all these things add up, right? Like when you go out as a customer, you're tipping and you're also paying 7% on health insurance. But these are things that local people have voted for,
Right. And again, just like Obamacare, those mandates are mandates. Essentially, it's saying when you go to a restaurant, we're going to make sure that big healthcare companies get paid off a piece of that.
Yeah, exactly.
So that it's they say it's about health for the workers, but really it's about a steady stream of and a continued stream of income for healthcare companies. The one question there's a number of questions I have. First off, now in a lot of areas, a lot of cities, restaurant work is non-unionized. So that in of itself creates a barrier towards the possibility of advancement. And $20 an hour is not much. Like that's basically what the low end paras made at Mission High School or in San Francisco Unified. And those people those were like working poor, I understand that in Paris didn't get tips and things like that. Paris just got second and third jobs. Although I think it sounds like a similar thing would be happening in the food industry. So those folks who are making $20 an hour, that's not a lot. But is there a difference for a non-unionized worker in that industry who's a citizen, who's got their papers, and a person who's not? Did that person have a different experience?
So a non-unionized person with papers and without, you said?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, so just to clarify, there are jobs that have union protection in the city, in the restaurant industry, right? There is a bartenders union. There's also like hotels have, unions, but these jobs are far in between. The norm, like I would say, like 95% of the jobs in the city are non-unionized.
Yeah.
So yes, that's where I've worked at, non-union organized places, and this is the stuff that kind of irritates me, right? When we talk about racism and discrimination, and like San Francisco being less backwards, right, than other places, because like when I've talked to my coworkers who are undocumented, they very like from different walks of life at different times, people that don't know each other, often express to me the awareness of the racism that it is demonstrated in the way they get paid. Because people who are born here, people who speak better English, even though they're doing the same skill that doesn't require interaction or interfacing with customers, they often get paid less because it's just the way it is.
Who gets paid less?
The people who don't have documents.
Yeah.
And they are also expected, to work two jobs. So it's okay. We can pay them, $18 an hour, $71 an hour. sorry, $1 difference, right? And so, yeah, absolutely, there is a difference. I've seen it myself firsthand. And I work for people who say they care, and they do care to a degree, but the first people that get the shaft is the people that are most vulnerable, and often too, they also face the least tolerance, in the sense of they get reprimanded, they get fired more quickly. They're more disposable than people who are born here.
Hmm.
And you know it's true, it happens. And there's just this expectation that immigrants work harder, and I think it's implicit everywhere. And that's what they're looking for, Mexican workers in kitchens, versus someone who was born here.
Right. And I imagine since these are private companies, non-unionized, there's not like a wage scale written down on a contract that says if you've been this many years. So basically, all these negotiations of what you get paid coming in are made when you first get hired. And what I think you're somewhat saying is when that person is talking with the person that they know is undocumented, they kind of they tend to lower the starting salary, you know, so that when you end up speaking with your coworkers, you find out, wait a second, we're doing the same thing, but I'm getting paid $1 to $2 an hour less.
Yeah, there is definitely differences. And I mean, there's another sector of, like the renowned restaurants. They also tend to hire people that are coming right out of culinary school. So they have received some form of training. They may not be undocumented, but they still get exploited. In these restaurants know it. They absolutely go to culinary schools to recruit people so they can exploit, paying them the minimum wage, working them 10, 11 hours a day. And because these people who go to school uh, want want to do this as a career. So that's the carrot on that end. For people who are documented and go to school, um, oh, you'll work for this renowned chef and you can build your resume. And
Mm-hmm.
so these restaurants charging $50, $60 per plate are paying kids that went to two years to culinary school. They're paying them $16, $17, which is the minimum. And working 10 hours a day,
Right.
and running those places like they're military operations, because a lot of chefs are, it's a hierarchy, and they're the dictator of the workplace.
Yeah.
A lot of chefs are intimidated, and there's all sorts of personalities, and yeah.
And what about this that I've heard before about the front versus the back of the restaurant industry? What would you describe as the dynamic there? And again, we haven't gotten into COVID yet, so just
All right. I mean, the dynamic there's always been a difference. Generally, the people who don't speak English work in the kitchen, like the immigrant workers, or the people who just got out of culinary school, um, in the front of the house. That's where the money is at. Like if you really want to make money, become a server. Um, until recently, because that's changing too. How much money people are making, especially after COVID. But we'll get to that.
yeah.
But generally, yeah, the front of the house makes more money. With tips, the hourly is actually sometimes better than someone who is doing some office work. There are some restaurants, like in the high-end restaurants, that you can make $100,000 serving tables, but you're also dealing with high-end BS, right? And so, but there's a range, because like, and I'm talking about table service, because there's also counter service, like coffee shops, right? Like those people don't make as much tips, they take home very little. We're talking about like table service,
Yeah.
like
And you were in that industry for quite some time. Could you describe what would you say your experience was with all these different characters and all these different groupings? How did you shift over time, or what was your experience as in working in that? Because clearly you saw it and you were aware of it. Maybe you experienced it, um, but you still were able to stick in the industry for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, I started from the bottom. I started bussing tables, which is like you're in for the front of the house, or the other way is you can be a dishwasher for the back of the house. That's kind of the in. And so yeah, I spoke English, but I didn't. it took a while, right? Like, it started in my late, like 18, 19 years old is when I started working in the restaurant industry. And I wasn't very, at that time I had been in the country 6 years. So I wasn't aware of a lot of like cultural nuances that you need for service, right? Like, if you want to be personable with customers, um, and people tend to discriminate if you have a thicker accent. They do, like, I've
Yeah.
literally had managers that have commented on someone's ability to speak English in order for them to advance into another position, right? So a lot of people get stuck, people who don't speak English get stuck just bussing tables for the rest of their restaurant career, even though they have, they're pretty proficient at times, or they could learn, through training. But generally there is discrimination. So I, it took a while for me to move from bussing tables into being a server, because, that requires, again, people skills, some wine knowledge, alcohol knowledge, and these things, this knowledge you build over time. And so, you become a busser, runner, then a server. And I was a server for many years. I've been in the industry for 17 years. I bus tables maybe for like 6, 7 years. Then served for another 5, 6 years, and then became a manager myself. And Yeah, so I've actually gone through the ranks, and a lot of managers don't tend to do that. A lot of managers come from, just become a server, and then they become a manager, and but they don't have the experience of having done every job, that requires to operate a business. So I have done everything, and I think it shows. A lot of the people I work with, as a manager, love working with me, because they know I will get my hands dirty. They know that I have a sense of what happens on the floor. And also, just, I think my approach to management, like, it's different than other managers who are more like bosses. They're not leaders. For me, I try to be a leader. Like, I lead by example, by hard work, by just an honest approach to doing work, and as a collective. And so, and that often you just have managers that, they're the hammer. They're there
Right.
to I guess, punish, or uh, boss people around, or do the networking. That's very part of the industry. But for me, I'm about the work. I'm about, like, getting through a shift, getting through service, and making sure that we're operating as a team, because it's easier. It's a lot easier.
Hmm.
And I've been fortunate to work in places where it's a collective work, because there are different models as to how restaurants operate. Some, for example, pool the tips, and so everyone gets a percentage depending on your position. And the old model used to be where everyone kept their tips. So servers were in charge of distributing tips to the bartender, to the support staff, which is a busser or a runner. But it was, there was room for a lot of uh, subjectivity, right, in how that gets distributed, and also competitiveness in the workplace, right, because you're competing against other servers.
Yeah.
And but I think that model is kind of phasing out, because it creates a lot of issues among the staff, and that's another set of issues for the bosses to deal with. And so more and more tips have been pulled, and
Yeah.
they get distributed. And this is where I was mentioning that the kitchen staff has been brought into this pool of money, and but that also means that everyone else is making this. And so, by and large, at least the places I worked at, people are okay with doing this kind of stuff, because they do realize that the kitchen staff works hard. But there is being, I think, for years, like a don't ask, don't tell type of situation in terms of the
Yeah.
tips and sharing them with the kitchen. Um, but again, it's like, it does make a difference when the front of the house stuff, in terms of how much money they're making and taking home. So these jobs, I think, are less and less profitable for servers and people that are doing those jobs, because the back of the house is making a couple dollars more.
Yeah. First of all, a question about your experience managing, because, for me, I, I've always said I'm not sure I wouldn't be comfortable being a manager because if inevitably I'm going to have to tell somebody what to do, and that's not a situation I wanted to necessarily find myself in. Um, were there times when you did have to like really be stern and really be kind of like, a person basically saying, "Hey, you're fucking up," and da 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 da. Did you ever have to face that, and how did you take that? How did you deal with that um, when you had to do something like that? And was there a way it was different, kind of thing?
Yes, I mean, by and large, I guess I've tried to create. I don't like to reprimand. Like I don't like to punish at the workplace. Uh, but there are obligations, right? As a coworker,
Yeah,
to be accountable for your part of the process. And so yes, I've had to confront people. In the job where I was the manager the longest, and I worked there the longest, 13 years. I never wrote anyone up.
mm,
I never did. Well, actually, maybe once, but I don't remember very well. But it was like a very extreme case.
yeah,
And so, but generally, it's like I would have a conversation with my coworkers and express them like, that's not okay. You're letting people down. Fuck the business, fuck the money. It's about your coworkers.
yeah,
Where you're not showing up on time, where you're not doing your side work, where you're not, picking up the slack someone else is, because we are working in a very communal environment where everyone's producing something. And
hmm,
so that was my approach. Um, but I think also the post pandemic things have changed, and like in this latest job, I did have to fire a couple people
yeah,
who were just completely not team oriented, toxic, to the environment, and antagonistic to other coworkers. And I remember telling one of those people, because this person was an excellent bartender, excellent. They knew their job, but their attitude was just completely antagonizing again, and like it created a lot of conflict. And I was like, look, I think you're really good at your job, uh, I, you know, but I don't think your attitude is compatible with us, with
hmm,
here.
yeah,
And so I've had to take those, where it's just it's beyond being remedied,
mhm,
because like another part of my approach to management is like I don't have to like someone. Fair is fair. That's something I learned from my mom, who's also a supervisor. Like she will advocate for anybody, regardless of her personal opinions or feelings about someone. If a situation is not correct, is you still have to show up,
yeah.
and be consistent.
And that position, if you're not going to abuse it, you would need to be really fair, like you're saying. Like otherwise, you are going to be seen as partial to one person or one group of people than other. Um, how comfortable were you in that role, like personally? To let's even before the COVID ones, how comfortable were you having those one-on-one conversations that weren't about a written reprimand or some sort of reprimand, but were like, you know, hey, I need to talk to you. Was that something that was hard for you, or you felt no, this feels natural?
Um, I think it's I've had to learn, to exercise that voice, where like, and there's still work for me to do on that end. But no, it wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable. Um, Not in that environment, right? In my personal life, I'm very abrasive, very confrontational. Uh, but at work, I have a different mode, and I try to be less like emotional, and more like analyzing the situations. Um, and but yeah, no, I've had to learn, to advocate, for myself, because like, I'm as a manager, I still see myself as part of the team,
Yeah,
and so my job, doesn't have to be harder because someone else doesn't want to, be part of a team. Um, And so, yeah, no, I've been challenged in,
Right.
yeah.
So another, I do want to get to the COVID part, but one thing I also heard you talking about was sort of like the development profile of like, so again, in a unionized workplace, you have a seniority system. Like if you are more senior, you are safer. You can even get tenure. You're not completely bulletproof at that point, but you have a level of security that you didn't have if you hadn't had 2 or 3 years under your belt, or maybe 5 years sometimes. And even year to year, as you get more involved, or as you're more involved with that job, your wages go up, and your sense of security goes up, and it's regularized, right? What I hear you saying is in this non-unionized workplace with workers from this country and workers who don't have papers, like who are undocumented, the there was there was various different profiles of the potential for advancement. Like there was some set of people who had a pretty good, going upwards, and then you'd have another set of people. Maybe you know, maybe they have their papers, but they're Spanish speaking and maybe originally not from the United States, who have maybe a less aggressive profile up towards advancement, and then like the undocumented could just kind of be stuck somewhere for quite some time. That's roughly the situation.
Absolutely. I mean, you see a very small number of people that don't speak English very well, and move into another position, where the income is higher. It's absolutely rare. Maybe you see that in like Latino businesses, where the majority of the workers are Latinos, but where there are other races and like people that were born here, absolutely you see the disparity. It's like it's night and day. I invite anybody to look into a kitchen in San Francisco. Even an Italian restaurant, a Thai restaurant, or a lot of, especially the more the fancier places. It's not an Italian person cooking your meal. It's not an Indian person cooking your meal. And but even then, like even in like the more like the other like cultural restaurants, like Indian restaurants, I know there is some other abusive stuff going there that where they have their own people, their own labor, immigrant labor, that I'm not even aware of, but I know there is some like exploitative things going on there too, that are like bordering like slave work.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, no, there is a glass ceiling, I guess, for a lot of people, and it's a lot based on cultural differences, language differences, and yeah, it's just like if you're, again, even customers, people like are used to, even me, like I've been a manager, and a lot of people just assume I'm just like the support staff, like a busser or a runner, um, and yeah, if you look a certain way, they'll, even as quote unquote like woke San Francisco is,
Right.
there's a lot of assumptions and discrimination.
And is it just the fact? So, are they do restaurants essentially have a headhunter who's finding these folks, or is it just the sanctuary status that sort of keeps a steady flow of people who don't have documentation, who know that where the jobs are in that area? So there's just going to be a steady stream of resumes that are going to come your way if you're hiring. You don't have to find a place that is like a day labor center that will give you access to a bunch of people who don't have documents, so that you have a pool to work from. Can you just kind of sit there as an employer and they'll just come to you?
Well, that's changed. Like I mentioned before COVID, there was already a sort of shortage of some, like back of the house staff, like cooks, prep people, dishwashers, and so I think maybe 5 years ago, like the 4 or 5 years ago, employers could do that. They would sit and they could be selective about who they hired. Now it's a more dire situation. I think people have migrated out, uh, and it's hard to find people with experience.
Right.
Because we keep, there is still people coming to San Francisco, and also there is competition, right? A lot of, for example, people that don't speak the language that I've noticed are doing things like Uber or DoorDash, because it doesn't require a language really, like
Yeah.
language skills or cultural skills. They just show a phone, pick up the food, drop the food off, and the phone tells them where to go. So it doesn't require any sort of, again, experience or develop skills other than driving. And
Right.
so now restaurants, I know restaurants who struggle with finding a skilled real person, because that requires just like good knowledge on how to cook meat properly. Like a medium rare steak versus a medium well steak versus a medium steak. You can't just throw someone in the grill and expect them to produce those different temperatures. It requires a lot of experience, and so again, there is a shortage now of good workers, and um, yeah, so that's why I find it funny when people talk about unskilled labor, and I think that would fit in that. But just like I would invite anybody that to the fields, like, oh, that's skilled unskilled labor, like
Yeah.
crouch down and like picking things so fast, like as fast as a machine, or
Hmm.
and but that's the same situation in the kitchens here. Right now, there is a shortage, just to reiterate, and so restaurants are not in that position of just selecting people.
Right. And so let's go to the the industry had all sorts of difficult things within it that you had kind of found a bit of a place in. You found your own advancement in it, and you were essentially seemingly like kind of doing the managing thing, but in a way that was more attuned to your values and the way you would have wanted to be managed.
Yeah.
So it then COVID hits. What are some of the changes that you can discuss or that you can share that you saw as made kind of either significant changes in the way the industry operated?
Yeah. So, I mean, COVID was very disruptive, to say the least. I can speak, for example, about my brother. Well, when COVID first hit, we're all losing our job. A
Yeah.
lot of us were like, we can apply for unemployment, so fire me, don't fire people who can't apply to unemployment. Um,
And
and
just
so,
just to reiterate though, that was not mandate related. That's just the places are being said everything was being shut down. So that's the reason for that, at least at that point.
yeah, and so massive masses of layoffs. I remember like Instagram and some shit of, it's a bloodbath out there. Everyone's getting laid off. Like a lot of people, and actually, a lot of places just reduce their workforce because they again, you had to adapt. And like, for example, where I was working at the time, we became a counter service place, so we were doing deliveries, and just people would pick up food, and but that required a lot less personnel, and also restaurants had to do it because they didn't know what was going to happen. um, I think a lot of places did better than they did before, because they had less overhead, with the personnel that they had to use. And the first months of the pandemic, people were very supportive of businesses, and people were tipping very well. So a lot of the staff, where I was working, was doing okay, but that also required, say, half the staff to be laid off,
Yeah.
and the ones who stayed maybe did okay. Um, but yeah, a lot of people were just idled, and it took maybe like a year for things to stabilize to where people started returning. Because we had a couple of, in San Francisco, right? We had some of the most strict shutdowns. We were we would open and close. We did that a few times, where we couldn't serve people inside. Now we can. Now we can't. And so there, we had to lay off some people again. Post like the first wave of layoffs, we had to hire people again and let go. And in that process, there was a house cleaning. A lot of people who people didn't like got let go, not on the basis of any objective, plan, but a very subjective one. I know personally people who were laid off because someone didn't like them, in management or ownership. I know also that in other places, like in the a well-known restaurant chain, they fired everyone, people who had worked there for 10, 15 years and who had gained some sort of a raise. Maybe they were making $19 instead of 16, but they were fired and rehired at minimum wage, despite the PPP loans that these businesses had gotten. And they actually used a lot of the money to remodel or do some improvements to the business, rather than invested in labor. And
Right.
so there are places that are doing better now. And as it turns out, actually, a lot of small businesses have closed, and the game is more and more big businesses in the city, or like investor groups.
Right.
The most successful businesses are investor groups now in the city.
Yeah. And the thing to say about that though is like it was obvious to me that unions and workers were under attack when there was issuing of mandates. You've got to get the vax, or you can't, or you've got to take this PCR test. And I did. I was opposed to the lockdowns, but in listening, in some ways, the lockdowns themselves were anti-worker, right? And they were a weapon that the bosses could use to reshape their workplace and to use as an excuse to, like, I'm going to get rid of this set of people where I don't have to answer any questions, and in fact I have an excuse to do it because it's just been handed to me by the capitalist class in the United States. I mean, these are low level. These are I would describe some of these as just petty bourgeois, right? Owners, not capitalists. Not, I think one of the definitions is you have to have 50 employees to be almost in that capitalist class or something like that. And so we're talking about some people who didn't fit that profile, and what I think Marx called the middle class, and or small low, well, not small level capitalists, but just the middle class. So um, it's clear to me that the lockdowns were also like anti-worker and pro boss, pro pro your employer as a tool for basically to give them against you.
Yeah, there was an incident with my brother. So my brother had two jobs pre-pandemic, and then he was let go of one of them, and he was fired via text. A lot of people were fired via email, text. There was no face to face, and so he got paid his sick time, and he deposited the check, but because the bosses decided that no, they were not going to pay sick time out, they withdrew the money from his account. um,
Wow.
and so yeah, that was just one of many situations. And yeah, absolutely pro boss, and there was a reshaping in many places. And I mean, you asked me about like what the changes, right, post pandemic.
Well, but just to, like, again, when we talk about a left that embraces lockdowns, they
Yeah.
are embracing a weapon against workers. So
Uh,
that's, and there are more changes. So please feel free to go. Because I just think it's really worth underscoring because it's not just about mandates, which you may talk about here. I'm not sure.
yeah, and like those lockdowns absolutely affected undocumented workers the most. I, at the same time that I was doing this job managing the changes that were coming every week, every other week, I was organizing. That's when I was like part of this group that was helping undocumented people with basic things like food, rent, assistance. And by and large, it was completely it disproportionately affected single mothers, that were either, like most of them were like either, cleaners or restaurant workers that had to choose, between staying home doing the remote thing or going to work. And like, again, people who kept advocating for lockdowns, who were supposedly pro-immigrant, pro-sanctuary city, pro-workers, anti-capitalist, you know, anti-conservative, right, those racist people, there was no awareness of the damage that it was causing, to the most vulnerable in our society, and I think that a lot of people were pushed into other predatory situations, right? Like, for example, I know people that were taking payday loans, right? Like they're charged like 20-30% a month for for the small loans that they had to do to meet. And these are people, right? And a lot of undocumented people that don't have access maybe to credit, or things like that. So they would fall into the hands of these predatory characters in our communities. And you know, I had a very interesting vantage point at the time because I was managing this restaurant feeding people of means, right? Because ordering from DoorDash, you have to have fucking money. Like it's not. I've never done that actually. Maybe done it once in my life because it's a good markup, right, for the delivery
Yeah.
fee and all this stuff. And and then on the other hand, I was organizing deliveries for people that were undocumented that were getting a bag of $20 to $30 groceries, which might last them 2 to 3 days. And this complete disparity, and you know, um, in that at the same time, a lot of the people that once vaccine came into the picture, a lot of people that were hesitant to get vaccinated were these undocumented immigrant workers that already got screwed. While the people who work from home, who have the income to be able to keep buying food right on delivery, were supporting and vilifying people who were resisting all this stuff, or people who didn't stay home, because a lot of people in the mission in San Francisco, which is the Latino community, the working class, um, they couldn't stay home. A lot of people live in very precarious situations, right? Like you taught some of those kids.
Yeah.
I was one of those kids when I first moved into this country. I was living in one room with 5 people, another family in another room, another couple in another room, sharing one bathroom, one kitchen, and I'm supposed to be locked down and not, without an income. you know and then if I resist getting a vaccine, I'm also a villain, and I'm an ignorant backwards person probably, because that's the funny thing about San Francisco, that to me is that there is this all this implicit like racist, classes, discriminatory ideas, of having to educate people at the bottom, or like that the reason they're struggling is because they need more education,
Yeah.
more opportunities to the same system that's screwing them, that's allowing their fucking like nights out, um, to happen, the theater that happens in every fucking restaurant here, where like there's people who have, who work 10, 12, 13, 14 hours a day cooking their food, or also like cleaning their plates, and and again, and that goes into other areas where the people want to just talk about the minimum wage, but there's also a fundamental lack of understanding of, for example, that business that I work for, they're as good as a boss can be. Like they are generous in many ways, but they still run a business. And because they're not business minded, they're struggling every day. They're not, they they don't see people as numbers as they have to in this system. So they're struggling with shutting down every day.
Yeah.
And so the people that cut, that don't have mercy, they're doing better. They're doing well. And ironically, some of those people are again the people that fit the identity politics rubric.
Yeah.
Like Latino immigrants, and they're as abusive to our people as any other boss, who wants to make money. And yeah, and like never mind all the hurdles that a small business has to do in order to stay competitive against the big investment groups. And so what's created is a situation where having a small business is just unsustainable more and more.
Yeah.
Um, and
And oh, go ahead.
no, yeah, it just takes big money to have a restaurant in San Francisco.
And not just that though, but you have to be brutal. to survive. If you want to do well, you can be brutal and still fail. But if you want to give yourself the best chance of
Yeah.
surviving, you just got to be brutal. And that's, I think, for me, that really describes capitalism, like the development, like of why the capitalist class is the way it is in, it is essentially the the top tier people who have essentially been groomed to be the most brutal, the most profit oriented, the most I don't care about humans, because the more you are like that, the more successful you will lead a business under capitalism. And so I feel like your story for smaller businesses really speaks to how do we understand why big businesses are this way today. It is it's like an almost evolution, and it if in order for them to be the most to be at the top, they just have to like not care at all and actually be willing to use people like chess pieces.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's I the the most successful restaurants absolutely are brutal, and people kind of steer away from them now that there is a little more choice, right? Like I explained that there a lot of employers in the restaurant industry are not being as selective as they were 5 years ago.
Yeah.
um, and and so but and a lot of the workers, rightly so, stay away from the fancier places, right? Because they're so dictatorial and so like uh, about every little detail, to create this illusion, right? This experience for the customers that demand all these things. And like one of the reasons I tell my brother not to live where he's at is because it's like I've seen the fancier places, and they make as much money maybe dealing with more bullshit, more dictations, and and it also like weirdly creates this like this horrible mentality, like I remember. So when I my last job, at one point I was working 10, 11, 12 hours a day. I was a manager, I'm salaried. And I remember venting with other people who have managed or who are managers, and their response was, that's just the way it is, and so people find it normal to work 10 to 12 hours a day just because you're on salary, and there is no attempt to say that's fucked up and it needs to change. No, it's like, no, that's just the way it is, just like put your head down and take it, basically.
Yeah.
And and it's sad, it's sad because I also see people that are broken, in terms of their mental, physical, spiritual self. It's broken because there's they're enslaved, right? Like it is slavery.
Yeah.
It's wage slavery. And yes, they have sure money coming in, but like that's why a lot of people actually stay away from management. It's kind of a known thing. A lot of people stay away from management because it's super exploitative.
Yeah.
Because a server can make more money than a manager. But you have to choose between a server who can get cut, who can get fired, you know, who, if it's slow, you'll be sent home, so you may not make money that day. There's uncertainty. Or as a manager, you have a steady stream of income, but you might have to work 10, 11 hours because you have to cut people.
Yeah. And this was my impression from you, Kenny. Like, because you were in the industry, you were in that business for a long time, so you were able to survive that grind. But to me, my impression is once it not just went from lockdowns, and I remember that period of insecurity when you were talking about, is my place going to be open? Is it going to be shut down? And that kind of revolving door of open, closed, and then how were they open? Were they open as almost a takeout business? Did they have in-house customers and things like that? Um, but what seemed to really change, in my impression, for your work, was when the stuff around mandates,
Yeah.
when mandates hit. So maybe can you talk about that? Talk about what you saw it did to the industry, and would you agree that that's where, in a sense, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, or was it the straw that broke the camel's back, or did it actually become decisively worse for you, so that you like, this is now I got to get out?
Um, I again, it definitely added something to the fire. Like because again, the first, I don't know how long it took for the vaccine to come into effect, like 10 months.
Yeah.
Right. So those first 10 months, I would say, were characterized by we're in this together. Like
Right.
and a lot of people were like, we'll take a risk, and like I guess we have to take a risk. And people were concerned about the having to work, and people with preconditions, were really afraid. But again, again, we were governed by we're in this together. We're doing something, and then customers were also very supportive financially, and also like frontline workers.
Yeah.
Like, yay, we did it 10 months, right? And like in that period, one person had COVID where I was working, but it wasn't, they were kind of concerned, but I think as time went on, and the lockdowns, or the not the measures, right, like social distancing, masking, uh, we're starting to wear off, I think. And once the vaccine came live, game over. That's when like the divisions became clear, and by and large, everyone that I was working with was taking took the vaccine. I was one of two people that resisted, and then there was some tension, that was created as a result. There was harassment. I can absolutely say that. If I had an objective HR person, that would be considered harassment, regarding not wanting to take that, or being argumentative. Um, and there was more doubt inserted into being around each other. It was kind of crazy to me, because we had done this work for 10 months. No one here has died. No one here has lost anybody. No one here has seen anybody falling, like how they're showing it on videos and stuff. But suddenly, because I don't want to take that, because I'm aware of natural immunity and all this stuff, or I never put anything in my body. Like, that's how I operate. People know that. Like, I don't drink ibuprofen until I have to, like, when really I can bear it. Like, I avoid taking medicines, but now I have to take it. And I even had a conversation with the ownership at the time, regarding my refusal. Um, and they gave me the arguments that were being given, on TV, but I stood my ground. I told them, look, you do what you have to do. I'll do what I have to do. And I gave my arguments, and you know, they knew that my politics were a little more radical, so they kind of dismissed me as Kenny doing his thing,
Yeah.
even though they were praising me for doing this community work. And I even got the restaurant involved in some of that work, and they got them good PR, and but then I was suddenly suspicious. I was the one carrying the virus. I was the one, and so and it was constant. Like, it was comments, customers. The customers became vicious when we reopened the outside area. I would hear the conversations that customers were having, and basically wishing ill on people. You know, uh, like sharing those. You know, the propaganda of the repenting unvaccinated person. On the deathbed, and or showing how backwards people are, and here I was, one of the few people not vaccinated in this establishment, and everyone else assumed that everyone was vaccinated, and everyone would share into that, you know, nasty views of people who refuse to take this stuff. And so all this stuff, like, it just became more and more detrimental, to myself, and I didn't feel comfortable. I felt harassed constantly. Um, Everyone was vicious, and quite honest, even using the COVID policies to um, excuse very anti-human behavior, and racist behavior, to be honest, because like very, and then like discrimination became legal, because I remember when we were mandated to check the vaccines to allow people to come inside. the majority, I would say, like a good chunk of people were black, who would come and not have that in Latino, black and Latino, and not have their vaccination, but we had to refuse service,
Mm.
or indoor service for them. And so in here I was in a city, right, that quickly responds to um, like the South, right? Those racist Southern people and their ID voting laws, right? Like the voting ID laws to
Right.
prohibit people from accessing voting. And here we are having people, forcing people to have, a medical procedure that, a forced medical procedure and show me their ID.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, in my mind, it's like so hypocritical. So that all this stuff just like deteriorated my mental, emotional, health. And I couldn't hang out with people that I was going hiking with for 10 months. They
Yeah.
suddenly became like coworkers too. Like we suddenly had fundamental disagreements.
Yeah. It's interesting because that, in some ways, that your situation at your work is very similar to what I experienced when I was respected and people saw me as a person who could be trusted from my union organizing. And your approach to managing was similar, where because I felt as a union organizer, even if there were a person who was a worker who was anti-union and who was against the union, if they were getting messed with, you protect them just like anybody, whether they're pro-union or not, because we're all part of the same team as workers. And you, so I feel like you had a similar experience where literally in a very short part, in a 6-month period to a year period, an entire shift took place that you get perceived of as a completely different person. And I do remember, like the year that I ended up leaving San Francisco Unified, I remember walking around inside my room inside my school, feeling like I don't feel like I belong. I feel like I'm going to get kicked out. Like I feel like a stranger here. They don't have the basis yet to kick me out, and I could feel like there was more mandate like things coming that were going to make it harder for me to really stay and give them the excuse to kick me out. But even before then, I felt like I was being ejected.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get kicked out, but I was getting pushed out, and
Yeah.
I remember that even in that period, I asked for a raise, because my hours were cut, like, and so I was struggling financially, like I never qualified for unemployment, so I I was stuck with reduced hours, and so as part of the as a condition of my raise, it was proposed that I would take the vaccine, and they would maybe give me a few $100 incentive, and so by then I was like, fuck this. As soon as I can, I need to go. But again, at the time, everyone else was doing that, and so my options were zero, like or be unemployed or continue to deal with this bullshit,
Yeah.
you know.
And
Yeah.
the irony is, because you ended up, you know, um, taking the Johnson & Johnson shot to go to Canada to see your cousin, um, and then it really wasn't too much longer after that that you left that work.
Yeah, because all these uh, all this, like, again, harassment, this like insulting, offer of, choosing, like doing it for money, as if I'm that stupid, if they don't know me, what I stand for, and so all that, even my coworkers, I didn't feel like I belonged there. Like suddenly I became, again, like I said, a person that not to be trusted, that I was, irresponsible or immoral,
Mhm.
and so yeah, I had to find a way out, and I did, and so I went to another job that actually masks. By that time, they were okay without masks because it reopened after like most of the more restrictive policies were lifted, and so it felt freeing. I was there, no mask, um, and it was also a different like demographic, or like a different like customer base, a more affluent customer base, and so I also saw the difference there. like people with money, it's like they don't give a shit. A lot of people with money didn't give a shit about their kids being masked or and by and large, there's still a lot of people who are still living with that, but like psychosis, I guess, but yeah, but by and large, there was a difference,
Right.
like wealthier people. I was like, damn, you really are not as concerned.
As you saw more wealthier clientele, there was less masking and less of the fear of the disease and things like that. Um, so your reasons for going to the next job were by and large to get out from behind these medical restrictions and to try to feel more free, and with maybe I imagine with the idea of possibly rebuilding an idea like what you had had at the previous job, which is trust and leading by example and things like that. Was that your goal, and how did it end up going?
It was also financial, so financial and those restrictions that they went hand in hand for me. And, I, so I got there and, um, it was okay because it was a process. We were reopening, uh, different services. So that we were adding services, right? So it was just dinner, then we added lunch, then we added brunch. So we became a all days, 7 days a week place.
Mm,
So, um, and so it's a bigger staff. It's more attention to detail. It's more prestige, of the restaurant. And so at first I was, okay, like I was like, all right, this is better. And but then little by little, as things were getting added to my plate because we were opening more and more, um, I just became a slave to that work,
mm,
and it was just expected, you know, um, of working 10 hours a day. That was just the norm. And if you had to work more, that's good. And not only that, but like also dealing with people going out with COVID, right? And like I didn't have like people can just claim they had COVID and get
yeah,
out. And, and like in a way I was like, I get it for the workers, like,
right,
you take your time. Um, Even though like for a worker in the restaurant industry, that means a loss of income because like again, most people are not employed full time and you don't get sick time, and so or sick time means getting just the minimum wage, not tips.
yeah,
But still, people were calling out, and so dealing with the shortage of personnel, dealing with more longer hours, more stress, um, and it just continued to wear me down, because here I thought I was gonna have a better quality of life and also be in a better financial position, but it wasn't true. Like financially, I was like making on paper, I was making way more, but I wasn't seeing it because
mm,
I'm getting taxed,
yeah,
and so whereas a server, a lot of people do it because not all the income gets taxed, and
right,
so um, I just every day I kept thinking, damn, I can make more money just serving, not having to deal with bullshit managing people sucking up to like irrational requests, inconsiderate requests from customers,
yeah,
um, not having to deal with the pressure from the top from the numbers people, right, like the bosses. um so it was like the first half was good, and then I did make great connections with coworkers. Again, I was managed to connect with people in a genuine way and like and talk shit about like what was wrong with things, and um but you know my first, like, I think incentive to be there was financial, but I was like, I don't see it. And especially when I guess inflation starting to hit, it's like
yeah.
what
So it's getting eaten up. And another thing that I started to hear more of were stories of your clientele, like and
yeah.
there was something that was happening there for you, or at least that was creating an impression. I don't know if it was. Well, you can tell me.
Yeah, I mean, there was more people more affluent people, people more connected to the tech, like direct tech stuff and tech capital. It was the irony as we were discussing things on this show, right? And so yeah, absolutely, like people who had no fucking qualms about dropping $2,000 in a dinner, for 4 people, or or buying a restaurant for $30,000, and also seeing like how much people of color are in these positions of of influence and power in this world, right? That's like shaping everything that we're living under. And so it was very enlightening in that way, that um again, these whole like analogies of white privilege and white power, like are really off. They don't explain the world that I see, in terms of who's pulling the strings and what kind of people are in positions of power. um and yeah, I mean, it's like it's a whole different world, of seeing someone casually coming with like $600 shoes, tennis shoes, and $5,000 bags or jackets and things like that. And again, people of all colors and races and nationalities, play at the top there, because they may not be the very very top, but they have a very close proximity, to the ones
Well,
pulling the strings.
the the thing in identity politics will often say that if you have people of color in those positions, that they'll be less aggressive, less exploitative, and that clearly isn't your experience.
No, I mean, it's not. It hasn't for years, and like, I mean, I guess people can accuse me of confirmation bias, but I have confirmed it.
Yeah,
Like, it's like, um, yeah, it doesn't explain the world that I see and live, and yeah.
yeah. And I was going to ask. Oh, well, so what was the breaking point here then for you being like, okay, now I'm done?
Yeah, so for me, it's again, like I was in it for, like, financials was my part of it, but also just quality of life. My mental health deteriorated even more.
Yeah,
Like I was more stressed out. It caused conflicts with my partner, because I wasn't in a good mental health space. And I don't react very well to super high stress. I don't think it's not normal. I mean, like,
yeah,
and so it, and also, like, again, I thought the financial part was going to be significant, to compensate and so that I can do other things, and it wasn't there. Not especially not in this city. Like, I realized that in order to be okay here, I'm gonna have to do things that I don't want to do.
right. It probably got chewed up, like you said, by taxes, cost of living, and inflation.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was not by any means having a luxurious life.
Yeah,
You know, and again, just car payments, gas, food costs, rent, healthcare,
yeah,
and there we go. And family obligations, I guess.
yeah. So, in light of these changes, like this change point that with from lockdowns to mandates and all of these being places where greater control of workers can be exercised. Um, looking at the service industry from prior to COVID, through COVID, and now at this point where it's kind of like it's not post because we're still in this nonsense, even though Biden said, "Oh, with the mandate, the pandemic is over." Um, what do you? How would you describe the changes you're seeing in that area of industry? And I would. That's not the. Those aren't the biggest food places. It's sort of like the middle tier businesses that exist in all these cities, that are part of the food industry, and part of like people go to eat there and they would entertain themselves. And uh, how would how would you describe what's taking place in that industry as you look from prior to COVID to now? And then where do you see it going?
I mean, technology, that's technology is more inserted. I can speak from my experience of managing that restaurant during the shutdowns, reopenings, and because we were forced to do things we didn't want to do. Again, forced squares. We had to sign up for platforms like for deliveries, um, delivery like Uber, DoorDash. I don't even know if we can say this here, but uh, those kind of services, and they take a chunk, from the sales. Um, for a lot of places, a lot of restaurants, especially the small ones, no one's getting rich there. That's a lie. Like, yeah, they're still exploiting people, but no one's getting rich there. And the margin of profit is very small. And so once you sign up for the sale, on Uber, Uber will take. At the time, there was like a citywide policy where they could only take max 15%. But then, like afterwards, they started taking more percentage, up to 30% of the of the sales. But that, and again, the margin of profit is already small for in food. Alcohol is where the money is. And so again, you have to sign up for all these if you want to stay relevant, if you want to sell, if you want to have some volume, and if you want to have, just publicity, right, to let people know that we're there. So that's one way, like that. Also, the QR codes, they're everywhere now. And I know there are some restaurants in the city now just using those QR codes and hiring less staff. So basically, and that's what I envision happening in the future. Is like, because again, with the minimum wage rises, healthcare, all this stuff, small businesses are less profitable, and so, and they also can't charge absurd amounts, or people won't come to the restaurant. The clientele won't come. So the pressures of the market, right? And so again, QR codes are allowing businesses to use less people on the floor,
Yeah.
for example. And also the kitchens, like it's just like any business cycle, right? Like capitalism, when there is a crisis, workers are they push more work onto them, and so more work is being done by less people. And I think that's in a lot of places they've become more efficient at exploiting people in different, especially in the production area. Like the kitchen. Like I know there are, for example, they're quicker at cutting people. So that means people don't have an income, and you may show up to work, but you may not have a full days of work.
Right.
And so again, those are some things that have changed like significantly. Also, the hours of operation have changed a lot. Like I think more people got used to ordering in, I guess, than going out. A
Yeah.
lot of businesses are not operating at the same hours that they were before. So, say for example, we were operating until 11 p.m. on Friday, Saturday, and so now the latest that we're open is 9:30, 10, and there's like little to no life outside. Like in San Francisco, and I think it's a factor of people moving out. Also, I think a lot of people age during the lockdowns, whatever, the 2 years, people had families, and of the old customers, at least that I noticed. And so I think for the smaller places, things are a little slimmer, the margin of error is smaller. And um, like you see the groups thriving, the restaurant groups thriving more than the smaller ones. And so you have again a more concentration of who owns restaurants in the city, and it's again the people who are in those circles are the ones who network together, um, and they all kind of know each other. Like if you go to a fancy bakery, a fancy restaurant, the owners and managers all know each other.
Yeah. to me, it sounds like it's an industry, at least at the level that where you worked with, where you know the owner, and it looks like that whole layer, like what's been talked about during this period, is the destruction of the middle class. It looks like that whole layer is just being erased slowly and being like piece by piece. They'd have to do these various things to survive, but each thing that they do to survive ensures that they're eventually going to be walked off the stage. It does look like an industry that will be left to only the big players.
Yeah, and and I also wonder, just because just the nature of socializing has changed. Like, again, um, people like the younger people I notice are less sociable.
Yeah.
It's like they're more in their phones,
Yep.
and so going out to a bar is not as enticing. And for example, something that I think has gotten bigger and bigger is like those big, like, mass produced, what do you call, music festivals,
Mm.
like, outside lands, and that's what a lot of the younger crowd uh, is gravitates towards. And so these, like, pockets of, like, like undercurrents of culture, right, in San Francisco, they're dying out.
Yeah.
Like the small jazz bar, or that bar where they play, this other music, and again, everything's being homogenized in like a gentrified way, and where it's not very welcoming, to, like, people outside of that scene willing to spend a lot of money on a night out. And so it's definitely, like, I think it's becoming less, like, accessible to more people. So it's gonna cater more and more to, like, the haves and the
Yeah.
have-nots. You gotta really think hard if you want to order in, from DoorDash.
Right. Right. Um, and so what, like, I know you're leaving San Francisco. What is it that you now hope for this next part? Like what informed your decision to leave San Francisco to go where you're going to Central Valley? And what do you hope for yourself as a result of this change in terms of what's next for you and maybe for you and Crystal or your partner?
Yeah. So Cristal and I have talked about this stuff, and, like, one of the things that I think I want, and I think we both want, is just healing from this whole thing.
Mm.
This whole, because at one point I had so much community, I was so happy, and but then the vaccine broke that apart, and other things, but um and financially, I'm in the worst shape that I've been in years, despite having the best paying job that I've had. Um, and also, the city is just not the same for me. It's not. You know, came to the city in 1999, so 23 years, 22 years, and it always felt like home. But because I had things to come back to, right? Things that are good memories, and or places where I could potentially make good memories. But more and more, I just see the what do you call the ruins of it, and they may not show physically, right, because we're getting new buildings and all this stuff.
Hmm.
But in terms of the quality of the people, like, a lot of people you know that I know have left. A lot of people have left that I used to know, and also, I'm increasingly just annoyed by the conversations that are had here, that lack anything meaningful. I even went to Isla Mujeres, and someone who is from Canada but lives there, she told us that San Franciscans that go there only talk about money. And so and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Hmm.
And in technology, and so for example, I enjoy going to Oakland more than San Francisco, because there's more substance in Oakland.
Yeah.
San Francisco is kind of doesn't have a soul anymore to me.
Yeah.
And and plus I'm seeing all this technology just creeping in, and there is no little to no resistance really,
Yeah.
and awareness of the issues, right, that will cause. And so I have an opportunity to go and have a bigger house, parking, laundry in the unit. That might seem like normal for a lot of people, but for me, it wasn't. It hasn't been, available in the city, and that also takes time from your life. It also adds stress to your life. Having to go do laundry for 2 to 3 hours and then come back, unload. Go do groceries, and again, I just don't feel connected to the city anymore.
Yeah.
My family's still here, but I really don't care for the restaurants. I don't care for the bars. I think I've also changed. I've also evolved through the pandemic, and I want other things. I want barbecue. I want to be able to garden. I want to uh, maybe even be able to have some silence.
Mm.
Not be stuck on traffic or like entitled people, and arrogant people, and you know people that don't look at you in the eyes, or don't acknowledge your existence.
Yeah.
um, and that's something that I wanted to bring up, that it's funny when I tell people where I'm moving to, their first reaction is a very like um, judgmental attitude, like as if I'm going backwards, not
Mhm.
progressing, right? And I'm actually happy because like I'm going back to basics, and like I'm okay with just drinking a beer. I don't have to have a $15 cocktail.
Yeah. I
And
I think there's all that stuff Allison talks about smart cities and the prisons that cities are going to become. That I think San Francisco is at the forefront of that, because I think all cities are going to face what this is, including Oakland and including cities outside of California are going to face the kind of internal erosion that you're describing, and that there's no options, and things will get segmented even more between the haves and the have-nots, and tech will be the intermediary for all of that. So the so it's I think we've all had illusions, and we've had illusions of culture here that I think have been increasingly stripped away for us, or pieces taken out, and so now the building is collapsing. So that I don't see anything particularly great about living in a city. I think there's more problems in some ways for me when I think about living in a city than when I think about living in a place which is more spread out and more rural. Um, and many people have left, right? People are leaving. And people talked about, like, if this so and so politician gets elected, we'll leave, and I'll go to France, I'll go to Canada, and they never did. But whatever has happened here has forced people to really pick up and leave. You know, so this is a real dislocation that's taken place. Um, and I know it's interesting listening to you, because I just feel like your industry, in the same way that the education industry is just being taken over piece by piece by tech, by the capitalist system. It's not going to be brick and mortar. It's not going to be humans. It's just going to be a cold, naked city serving. I'm not even sure who's going to be left, but that's what it seems to be a vision of.
yeah, I mean, I don't want to be here for when those cars that are already cruising the city without people, right? Like
Yeah,
when they start, like enforcing parking meters, when they start, doing more and more of this, policing and watching people every day, and also, just like if people bother to have a conversation. Like the other day, I had a conversation with a customer so I'm still picking up shifts, in different places. I'm
yeah,
making ends meet right now. And this guy, he always buys a piece of chicken, and we actually had a conversation. And I was like, "Hey, how are you? Haven't heard from you in a while." And then we finally connected, right? Because I think the relationship was like mediated through the pandemic. So it was mask, it was like a shield. And now, like, no mask, we had a conversation face to face. And he was telling me about his experience being an Uber driver and how he's increasingly made less money and like he lives in his car and that he could afford a hotel at least once or twice a week before, but now he can't. So he's just sleeping in his car.
Wow.
And so, and then I asked him a question, so what do you think about these automated, cars? And then, he's a 50 plus year old, black man. And, he's like, I don't know, man, like this internet thing, it's like, it's a trap, and then I agreed with him and then we started talking more. Um, and so, he knows, and I think that's going to be more of the experience, right? We've talked about this on the show that, and I think there's a mistake to think that only like the quote unquote low skill labor it's gonna, yeah, of course it's gonna be affected first, but it's coming after other industries that we can't even
Oh
see.
yeah. Yeah.
And so yes, like we talked in another show, right? We're gonna be gig workers in the Pacific Standard Time, and you know um, it's nothing new, right? Like the gig work, but it's more and more being mediated through technology. And that means there's a mediator, right? There's channels of control and also straight up robbery, right? Like
Yeah.
they're taking more and more. They're doing it to businesses, they're doing it to workers, you know, and so yeah, it's not a recipe for anything good. And at the same time, these same systems are systems of surveillance, right? And so when there's a reaction to the immiseration, like I just wonder uh, how we're gonna be ready because the people that I used to once organize, what they're doing now is joining partnerships with fucking autonomous vehicles in the name of local like community, in the name of fucking people of color, you know, self-serving and while being advocates of the immiseration, of people like this guy who drives, right?
Yeah.
And whose industry, like, yes, Uber was disruptive to taxi drivers, and now you're gonna get the Waymos, the cruises that are gonna replace those. And so where do they go next?
Yep.
Like 2 to 3 jobs, more gig work, and like already people are working two jobs, like how sustainable is that? And I see that again in the people that even the like some of the staff that I manage in this last restaurant, a lot of these people are completely broken.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't mean that as a judgment of them, more of as an observation. It's just like, damn, dude, this thing is doing, people that haven't had healthcare in a while, and they have an obvious illness that needs to be taken care of. People that have, dependency issues with alcohol, drugs, people struggling to pay rent, going check by check, just working overtime because that's the only way they can see some money. And again, it's like it's a big trap, and like I don't want to be around this. And it's not that I like I got tired. I'm tired. Like, I've fought, I've done my what I could. And you know I don't know, like I don't know if I'll be back to this city. Like I don't.
I
But
can't see it. I
it
mean,
just it's just I don't recognize it anymore. I
yeah,
don't.
I would not. I mean, look, we haven't had a chance to get together and do a hike or anything like that. But I, I I'm glad for you. I'm glad you're making the decision to do this. Um, the problems are going to exist everywhere, um, and but maybe you will find people that you can talk with about building something that you can preserve and building something that, like we say, building something worth defending. Um, but like you said, I think people are either broken or, and I think taking the injection has had a piece of that. essentially agreeing to whatever the government told them to do out of fear. I mean, of course, there were the zealots who were just into it, but a lot of people were not into it, but felt like they had to go along to get along. And I think there's been a break. I think those people have been broken in a particular way. I, I'm not going to say they can't recover, because I do believe it's possible to turn. Don't think it's likely, but I think it's possible to turn this around if people fight back and people say, no, we're not doing this anymore. But I think it's had a really, there's so much layers of damage that it's done to people. And that's why I think it's for you to have a chance to refine and recenter yourself. I think this is not just, it's a fortuitous opportunity, but I think it will be good for you.
Yeah, I think so too. It's yeah, and I actually right now I am underemployed. I'm not fully employed, and I'm the most relaxed I've been in a while.
Yeah.
And you know that again, like you said, we're still living in a capitalist system where we have to sell our time for wages, right?
Yeah.
And so there will be problems anywhere, but um, I think where I'm going, I'm definitely not gonna face the harassment, the accusations, there is more connection because it's a more rural area. I think that I think somehow there is more connection to real life.
And
And
yeah, and we'll see. I mean, I think we'll come back to some of this
yeah,
stuff, and you can talk about what your experience is. Nevertheless, you can't stay where you are. That's the big
yeah,
thing.
no, absolutely. There is no future for me here.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's literally 22 years of working in this city. My brother, my mother, working adults, right? And we could never buy a house here,
Yeah.
for example, right? Or we can never afford to have more determination in how we live.
Right.
Um, and
You're
so,
having less. Yeah.
yeah, like this is, like you said, just gotta keep moving, and I'm happy to be doing this with Cristal, and like we're looking forward to planting some stuff, maybe even having a dog, or
Yes. Awesome. That'll be fun.
and parking, and not having to deal with like people that are stressed out and like they don't even know it.
Yeah. 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 Um, is there anything else that you'd want to share about what we've talked, like that I haven't touched on or haven't asked about?
I just hope the people that are gonna stay behind, like my friends, people that I care about, I just hope they're okay, because like, and you know, like again, I don't have anything for sure on my end, but I just know this thing I do know. I don't know what's coming for me in the future, but what I do know is that this pace of life, this trap that already exists here, is not sustainable for any human. And again, I'm talking about the people that are in the grind, right? The people that are well off, they don't care. They're not even aware. But I'm talking about the people that are in the grind and we're supporting a lot of the bullshit that has made things even worse for us. And so they're the ones that I hope they're okay. And that um and I just hope they start asking more questions, and talking more shit with their coworkers, and actually doing something together, because that's the one thing I realized, like, and that's why I don't feel guilty, like I'm doing what I can when I can, and it's not just up to me, like it was never just up to me to do, you know to create community, and like I'm trying to find another one because like I don't have anything here. So I just hope that people can realize the importance of that, of community for um, having a decent life. Like
We've crapped on liberals so much, like during all these shows, um, about particularly around hypocrisy. And the city we've been talking about is San Francisco, right? The city that is supposedly so enlightened, so the city on the hill, so the city that is about workers' rights and about fighting racism, about progressiveness, and it's just an utter. destructive grind that creates like zombies inside of it. Um, Zombies of complete ignorance, liberal bliss, and who's only the only if they almost can't be accused of racism because they have these dreams of being anti-racist, of dreams of fighting or being against racism while they live in this ignorance of how much their own world just creates the very problems they say that they don't want to perpetuate. And then everyone else who lives underneath it, who's just getting pushed down deeper into the mud. That's San Francisco. San Francisco is at the head, it seems. New York City, I think, is a major area, and of liberal cities that are like a. You would imagine they would be a conservative dream, like you would imagine they'd be a dream for a capitalist who said, "I want to figure out how to screw people over really hard." And San Francisco says, "We figured it out. You're welcome here, because we have figured out how to destroy people and make you immensely wealthy,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and
all
like,
with a progressive gloss."
yeah, it's, I mean, we railed against that all
Yeah,
the time.
yeah.
And yeah, and I don't know what's going to come of it, but um,
I
again,
will just say this: I am glad to be out, and Oakland is going to be going the same way. I have,
mhm,
I think we're going to either fight it or we're going to have to go, and we'll try to fight it. But if we're not successful, we will retreat. Because we have one life to live, and I want to have some level of satisfaction. I don't want to just, feel like my nose is constantly being shoved into dirt. I want to be able to feel like there's some kind of dignity to my life. Um, so we'll fight it if we can here, but if it turns out we can't build a community that wants to push back against it, and things get even worse, we will go somewhere else as well.
yeah, I mean, that's the grind that, at least for now, from now, it's just greener pastures, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah,
And like you said, we're not naive, that the problems are not gonna follow us. It's like it's the world that's going this way,
yes, yeah,
and but at least for now, like we need a little breathing room
yep,
because
absolutely,
like both
absolutely,
Dad and I have fought our battles here,
yeah,
that have been unpopular with some people that again claim to be about humans. Um, but again, we'll see where we're at, and I think this is the time for me to like um, just heal and connect to life, and to not be in this completely reactive, space,
yeah.
being bombarded. So yeah,
Well, let's see how things go, and we'll come back to some of these things and see what you're saying about your new situation.
yeah,
All right, Kenny, I think that's it today.
yeah,
Um, well, thanks for sharing that, and um, there's a lot of interesting things. I think, particularly for me, to think of the similar. I didn't realize how similar our journey was in our areas of employment, and how similar. I've been so talking about the end of brick and mortar schools that I haven't, and I think that's coming, and it is come. The destruction of education as a place where you go and be in the same place with other humans. Um, I hadn't really thought. Well, of course it's happening, but to hear a similar story in your industry as well.
and I guess I will share this one thing that might seem gimmicky, but there is already in San Francisco this like the technology is coming in the production of things, like there is a, a bar that you can go and pay like kind of like a vending machine and get
Yes.
your own beer, and now there is like a Michelin, like a machine that makes um, Middle Eastern food,
Oh fuck.
that it was produced, but the machine, the menu was created by a Michelin star chef, right? But and with the excuse of bringing cheap meals to the people.
Yeah.
But again, it's like there's also a machine in San Francisco that makes burgers, like completely like, and so like it seems like a novelty until it's not, and
Yep.
it has repercussions.
Yep. Yep. There you go. Fourth Industrial Revolution comes back around to say hi. That's it then, folks. Thank you, Kenny, and you'll be back next week.
No, I'm in Mexico next week. Actually.
Oh, okay. So then it'll be Jessica, and we'll see if it's Eduardo. Man, I don't know. This is hard to put these episodes together these weeks. All right. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes of this podcast there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our 9 platforms on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Bitchute, Odysee, Rumble, YouTube, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. And if you would like to give us feedback about something you heard or suggest for something else to cover, contact us through our blog. So that's it for a reduced crew. Speaking of reduction in workforce, a reduced crew of What's Left. It's me and Kenny. We wish everyone, have a good week, and we'll see you. Well, I'll see you next week, and Kenny will be back in a few weeks.